welcome to Government Unit 5 Collision Points. What are collision points? Collision points are an example of real life would you rather. The kind of game where you sit around and you ask your friends, would you rather have this terrible thing happen to you or that terrible thing? Both of them are poor choices, but you have to pick one. Well, that's what a collision point is. You have two different things and you have to choose one over the other. The difference is these are things that actually happen. These are points, these are decisions that are going to happen. People have to make these decisions and they have to choose one good thing at the expense of another. One collision point that you'll see up on the test is majority rule versus individual rights. So majority rule is decision by vote. That's important. People have to know that things are being decided fairly. So if majority of people want it, we accept that that's a decision we're going to go with, accept going forward. But there's individual rights as well. What happens if the majority rule decides to take away someone's individual rights? Well, then that means your individual rights could be at jeopardy. But then if we always go against majority rule, always taking the side of individual rights, well, if too many people feel like their voice is not being heard, especially if it's the majority, well, that's how things like the Civil War happen. So you can't just ignore majority rule, but you can't let the majority get so strong and so powerful that it starts to crush individual rights for the unpopular people, because eventually people in the majority could end up in the minority and then their rights are being lost. Balancing between the two, there's no easy answer. It is one of those decisions that politicians have to make all the time, and then you as voters will have to make a decision on when you're voting for one piece of legislation or another. Liberty versus equality. This is pretty simple. Liberty is freedom to do what you want. Equality is ensuring everyone has the same opportunity no matter who you are. We talked a lot about this in Unit 1. Liberty in the form of taxes. The more you're taxed, less freedom you have. If the government taxes you $10, you do not have freedom to use that $10 how you want. You've lost freedom. However, the reason why that freedom is taken from you is so that the money can be spent on things like roads or the WIC program to help young mothers, or to help poor mothers, poor families, food stamps, education. These are all things that the government doesn't help you out with, doesn't help your community out with. Maybe you don't have them. If there's pure freedom and no taxes whatsoever, then the poorest communities will have no schools. I'm not talking about college, I'm talking about elementary schools, because who's going to pay for it? The government helps pay for these things. So we can't have absolute pure freedom and no taxes, but at the same time we understand that your money is your money. You still need to have some freedom to use your money how you will, so we can't overtax you as well in the name of equality. So that's a tough decision that has to be answered differently every year depending on the situation, depending on the circumstances. How much do we tax people in the name of the common good, in the name of equality? Civil disobedience versus rule of law. Civil disobedience, we know what that is. That's refusing to follow an unjust ruling or law and accepting the consequence. Rule of law, protecting people's rights and freedoms through law enforcement. Because if the government doesn't enforce laws, guess what? No one's going to follow them. And if no one follows them, then your life is in danger almost every day. Because anyone can just take what they want from you or do what they want to you. So we need rules and we need people to respect those rules. But at the same time, what happens if those rules are unfair? Or they treat one group of people better than others? Well, that's when civil disobedience has to happen. But it can be taken too far. That's where rule of law isn't always going to be subject to what people believe as far as is rule right or wrong. Because at the Michael Brown situation, Michael Brown was killed by a police officer and people protested it by rioting and destroying storefronts and hurting people. Well, that's civil disobedience, and maybe there was something that happened that night that was unjust, but that doesn't justify the extent to which they took it. And just or people were losing their businesses, losing their lives even. That's where civil disobedience has to bow before rule of law. but it's never easy to predict exactly how far is too far in some situations. Freedom of press versus right to a fair trial. This is a collision point that happens almost every year, pretty much every year at this point. Freedom of press, you know what that is. The media cannot be told by the government what they can and cannot report. Right to fair trial. You as an individual, if you're accused of a crime, whether you did it or not, have a right to a fair trial where a jury decides whether you're guilty or innocent, and that jury has to vote on your guilt or innocence fairly, meaning we're not going to put anybody on a jury if you're accused of a crime who knows you or knows the victim. We want to make sure that they don't know anything at all about anything that happened other than just the facts that get presented in the trial. Because if they know something from outside of the trial, like maybe they're related to the victim or they're related to you, no matter how hard they try, that's still going to be in their minds, and it's going to be hard for them to separate their feelings from just the facts. But what happens in a case like O.J. Simpson? O.J. Simpson was incredibly famous. Not only as a football star, Hall of Fame, major football star in the 70s, but in the 80s, he was in the early 90s, he was in a very successful series of movies. So even if you didn't care about football, you still knew who this guy was because he was all over the place. He was in commercials even. This guy was massive. Unfortunately, he was accused of killing his ex-wife and her boyfriend at the time. And when the police went to go pick him up, he got into his white Ford Bronco and took off down the highway with the police in pursuit. I saw this myself growing up as a child. And the reason why I watched it was not because I cared about watching the news or cared about OJ, but because if you were watching TV, the channel got changed on you. It went to live news reporting and the media was all over showing him on this, not high-speed pursuit, he wasn't moving very fast, but leading the cops on until eventually he stopped and the cops arrested him. Now, he went to trial, of course, for being accused of murdering his ex-wife and her boyfriend, and it was very difficult at the time to try to get a trial that was going to be completely fair, because at that point, it was too late. Everybody knew about this. Everyone saw this. And all these people who were watching TV that day or seeing it replayed on the news and on TV for weeks after that, they're going to see that. And it's going to be hard to find someone that knows nothing about the case, knows nothing about OJ, knows nothing about the car chase, so that they can judge what happened, what he did or did not do as fairly as possible. But what's the government supposed to do about that? They can't limit the press. They can't tell, oh, media, you can't report that. You can't say that. They can't do that because then that can lead to tyranny. But at the same time, that pure freedom leads to some individuals like O.J. Simpson losing some of their freedom to a right to fair trial. Finally, religion versus government. Religion as in freedom of religion. Not religion attacking anybody, but freedom of religion. The right to practice your beliefs without government telling you how to believe or that you can't believe. That is one freedom you have, but the government also has a responsibility to protect its citizens and their rights from each other. So as an adult, the government will never intervene with you as long as you don't do something that hurts someone else. But as a minor is dependent on their parent to make a lot of decisions for them. So for example, there are some religions that believe that doctors and hospitals should not be involved with health care at all. They believe that if you or someone in your family gets sick, just stay at home, pray it out, and let God decide, or whoever their God is. Now the problem is if you're an adult and you make that decision, fine. No one can get in trouble with that. If that's what you believe, as a legal adult, you have the right to do that. But like I said before, minors rely on their parents to make those kind of decisions. So what happens if parents let their child die from something that could have been treated, that could have been 100% prevented by a hospital, by doctors? Freedom of religion versus government's responsibility to protect us and protect people that can't make their own decisions, can't defend themselves, like many children. This is a difficult situation. It hasn't really been fully resolved. There have been cases where this has happened and the child died and the parents went to jail. They were punished for it. There's been other times when the case went before a court and the judge decided that no, the parents were within their freedom of religion to practice this way. And then there's been some cases where the parents were convicted and later had the court case overturned by a judge. We're still figuring this out, and these issues have happened very recently. This keeps coming up because there's not one set precedent for judges to follow. And that's it. If you have any questions, let me know in class, and good luck on the test.